Today I wanted to talk about and put into perspective how resilient horses are as animals and how much it costs them to do all the things that we expect of them. First and foremost, the average horse goes through several homes in their entire lifetime. It's not even uncommon to find horses that have 10 or more homes in their life, sometimes even into the 20s. This means is that they're constantly expected to adjust to new routines, new lifestyles and new barns, leaving herds of horses that they knew and built friendships with, and suddenly just having that all torn away and taken somewhere else where their entire routine changes. And generally speaking, people are not overly patient with them adjusting to new routines. The horse is just expected to do things right the very first time, and if they don't, they can be punished for it. They are forced to adapt quickly or potentially meet repercussions for not doing that and be labeled as rude or disrespectful if they're not able to adapt to confusing new lifestyles and mixed signals between new homes and new riders. Everything from their living situation to what we ask them to do in sport is about us to a large extent. It's not uncommon to see horses who are living completely alone and isolated in stalls where they have no other friends, and basically their life is non-existent unless they're doing something that's entirely revolving around the person's enjoyment and fun. The horse serves as the rider's toy for the time that they get to enjoy them while they're at the barn, but then the rider gets to go home and enjoy their very diverse life. Meanwhile, the horse is going back into a 12 by 12 box, often with boarded up walls and no ability to see or interact with other horses. This is a very, very lonely existence. We're talking, in some cases, 18 plus hours spent in these stalls. And they do this, and they deal with the stress of this and the boredom of this, and still manage to perform for us and be so resilient in every other aspect that I already mentioned. Even when their living situation is so detrimental to their well-being, they still come through and they perform and do their best for us. They dedicate their entire lives to pleasing humans and trying to jump through the hoops humans set for them, but we don't do enough to advocate for them and their safety and their well-being. This leaves them to developing stress vices and other means of coping with the stress of the lifestyle that they live. And then these make them undesirable to people, and people want them less when they have these vices, despite these vices only existing because of the stress of the lifestyle we impose on them. And then when horses misbehave, we blame the misbehavior on the horse. Most of the time, the horse is blamed solely for their behavior, and they can be punished or corrected for it. Neither of these things factor in that the horse could be reacting to management problems and a lot of stressors that it has been forced to deal with its whole life, because again, these animals are so stoic and resilient and they hardly complain. So when they do, people hate it and we get mad at them. The architecture even of all the stuff that we build for them is about human enjoyment and convenience. More common to see horses living separate from each other than together, despite them being herd animals. Largely, horses are made to live alone, which is super unnatural for them as a herd animal and a flight animal. They gain comfort and confidence from being with other horses because this is what keeps them safest as a flight animal. It's ingrained in their nature, and this isn't something we can undo. Some horses cope better with this loneliness than others, but that just means that they're more resilient. It doesn't mean that they should be made to cope with this just because they can. And we take for granted this resilience, and it leads to complacency, because if people are okay with seeing their horse put up with the situation they're in, they take that as the horse being happy and okay with it. When really all it is a statement of is how resilient their horse is and how stoic they are with putting up with a stressful situation. Even in situations where horses have shared fence lines, it's still super common to see them all alone. And this mindset really bleeds into the entire horse industry, and it leads people to thinking that group turnout is inherently more dangerous or something that shouldn't be done. In turn, we create poorly socialized horses who are more likely to be a liability in a herd. But it's not because they don't like being out in a herd, it's because they haven't been properly socialized. It's no different than if you kept a child locked up their entire life, never let them interact with other kids, and then just threw them into the deep end, taking them to a busy school and expecting them to react completely normally and know how to interact with everyone. This is simply not possible or fair to expect. We've created a culture where people will walk through these beautiful barns and they're wowed by beautiful wrought iron fixings, nice stained wood hardware, chandelier ceilings, beautiful walkways, really nice gardens, all of these things built for human convenience and enjoyment, including the stalls. This concept of the boarded up stall wall with no window or no ability for the horse to be able to look out of their stall or see or touch other horses is all about what is best for the human, full stop. Making a flight animal isolated and in a small area goes against their nature. And even if they cope well with it, it doesn't mean that this is what is best for them or what they will be happiest living in. And yet, because they are willing to put up with it for us, we take this as them being okay with it. And then we perpetuate this complacency again and again. A lonely horse in a stall should start eliciting a different reaction. We need to change the mindset that we view this type of living scenario with. Or we at least need to be more appreciative of the lengths we put our horses through just so that they can be used and enjoyed by us. And even if you can't provide the best case scenario living situation for your horse, it's important to perpetuate factual information and realism surrounding how to care for and manage horses. Because even if you can't immediately change your situation, by continuing that misinformation, you feed into the bad parts of the horse world. It is so hard to honestly look at the living situation you're able to offer for your horse and look at it through the horse's perspective and be honest with yourself about any shortcomings of that living situation. It's very hard to do, but it is necessary because if we don't do this, it shows a lack of appreciation for the sacrifices our horses have to make in order to live in this modern environment with us. For example, this horse in this background photo, this setup is not uncommon from a barn that I used to work at. The paddocks were literally as small as the stalls. The horses had no ability to run around or self-exercise or do anything than walk and maybe trot in and out of the stall and then hit the end of the paddock gate. They never get to express true freedom or running behaviors that flight animals should be able to do. And as a result, all of the horses at this barn that I worked at were way harder to ride and manage. They were way more flighty under saddle, they were more prone to bucking, bolting, rearing, they were harder to handle on the ground, and overall they were more dangerous. And people were frustrated with them because of this, even myself. It was frustrating for me even though I could look at the situation and know exactly why they were behaving this way. But not being able to change that situation myself and just having to work with the horses, it was very frustrating, and it's upsetting to work with horses like that because it's more dangerous for the handlers, but you feel sorry for them. And I had to get myself out of that situation because it was so emotionally taxing. But the realization of what is best for horses and what we should be pushing for to see and change, this can all be done while recognizing the fact that not all geographic locations have the same ability to do the exact same setups. For example, you can't have 100 acres of turnout in a city. But what you can do is try to build barns and paddocks that allow horses to mutual groom, even if it's just over a fence line, and allow them to go inside their stalls overnight and be able to see each other and touch noses through the bars. There's ways to change the architecture of how we build barns and fields and paddocks and equestrian facilities to make it better for the horse. But this will never happen if we keep putting ourselves above the well-being of the horse and caring more about our emotions and our feelings being hurt by acknowledging where we went wrong in horse care than we do about how much the horse has to deal with and how much stress they're having to deal with on a daily basis and just cope with and set aside. Because horses are so effective at dealing with stress and shortcomings in care and management and training, we just keep doing it because they're willing to let us. Horses are incredibly passive animals and they don't choose violence most of the time. And they're willing to put up with a lot because they're so passive. But again, this doesn't mean that they should have to. And it doesn't mean that they're more okay with something just because they're less outwardly obvious with their stress, discomfort, pain, fear, and so on. They have to be as a flight animal. They have to mask the stuff, or it's weakness. We need to start valuing horses' feelings as much as we value people who feel targeted and offended by information that hurts their feelings about how they train and manage their horses, even if the information that hurts their feelings is factually correct. You see, what I mean by this is horse people will go out of their way to defend their friends when their friends are given information like, hey, by the way, horses are flight animals, they're supposed to have friends, it's very stressful for them to spend 24 hours in a box stall. People will be offended by this and they'll jump to the defense and they'll ask for their friends to do the same. And people will spend so much time fighting for these people's honor because their feelings are hurt. Meanwhile, they're putting their own horses in much more stressful situations for years at a time without wanting to change it. So if your feelings are hurt by having to hear hard information, just consider how hard it is for your horse to cope in a situation that is less than ideal. They are having to deal with a lot, and they're handling it more gracefully than humans are able to. Similarly, we see this in training where people lose their patience with horses and handle them roughly, or put them through training that is so fast and inconsiderate that it scares the crap out of the horse and you get a flight reaction. We've seen this in videos I've talked about hard tying and the patience pull, and videos where people are flooding their horses with other scary stimuli. And these people will blame the horse and say that the horse needs to learn how to deal with it and they need to learn to do better, and that the horse is just throwing a tantrum and that they need to get over it. Meanwhile, the person doing this to the horse does not have the emotional control to be patient and not take their anger and frustration out on the horse. Meaning that the horse is actually doing a better job at controlling and suppressing their flight response in most cases than this person is ever able to do with controlling their desire to dominate and bully the horse around. Horses have far better emotional control than the vast majority of people in the horse world. And yet, when they finally get pushed over their threshold and we finally put them into a position where they just cannot cope with the stress anymore, they are the first one that gets blamed. We always say never blame the horse, it's never the horse's fault, but this behavior is almost never reflected in training. If this behavior was reflected, we wouldn't see punishment being justified to the extent that it is. Because by default, physical punishment to your horse is pointing at them and blaming them. You cannot physically punish an animal and not be giving them blame. Because a punishment is saying, hey, you did this wrong, which is saying, hey, this is your fault. And then you are punishing them accordingly. So we blame horses all the time, but then we throw around sayings like, never blame the horse, it's always the rider's fault. And we use that as a means of not accepting any accountability. It's a way of deflecting blame and pretending that we're doing something that is never reflected properly in our culture as riders. Another way horse people will give their blame to the horse is through the equipment that they use. And what I mean by this is that you see horse people all of the time saying, my horse needs this bit. My horse needs this gadget. My horse needs this certain type of handling or training methodology. And a lot of times that bit or that gadget or the way that they insist their horse needs to be trained is something that is inherently uncomfortable and painful to the horse. People will say, my horse needs this double twisted wire gag bit paired with a running martingale because they're so strong to fences. When in reality, it's the rider that needs this equipment. The rider is the one training the horse for the sport. The rider is the one that created the rushing problem and the strongness in the mouth and the bridle. The horse only knows how to be a horse. Everything to do with riding and being a competition mount is related to the rider. Whether the rider physically trained this horse or not, it is 100% the rider's and owner's responsibility to try to make their horse softer and more able to use comfortable equipment. Or at the bare minimum, it's their job to care about how harsh the equipment they put on their horse is. But we deflect blame to the horse by blaming the horse for the equipment we as riders need to use on them, when really the horse has no say in the matter whatsoever. They are merely a prop in this game. They rely completely on their rider to make these calls for them, and a lot of the times the rider will make the wrong call, but then they'll use the horse to justify why they made that call in an attempt to accept, again, no accountability. And people don't do this on purpose. I used to do stuff like this all the time. It's not like you're intentionally trying to do it to not accept accountability. In fact, most of these people will say that they do accept accountability, and they genuinely believe that they never blame the horse. But it requires questioning these biases and going back and looking on your way of thinking and what you've been taught and seeing how it actually reflects to the horse. How does this feel to the horse? Do you think your horse is like, oh yay, I love this harsh bit that is really hard and abrasive on the bars of my mouth and amplifies pressure through a shank, pulling down on my poll, one of the most sensitive areas of my body? No, they don't. They don't do that, I promise you. It's the person who pretends that they do because this gives them license to continue using these types of bits and equipment that make it easier to get to the end goal, which is competition or jumping higher or whatever it is. My horse needs draw reins to learn a frame. It's helping them set their head. But to the horse, the draw reins are just a pulley system that means that the rider cannot feel properly how much pressure they're inflicting on the horse's mouth. It forces the horse into a position that they cannot escape from. That's how the horse sees this, not the rider. The horse does not and never has needed draw reins. It's the rider that has needed them because they want to move the horse along faster than what they are currently able to do without this piece of equipment. For the horse, being forcibly pulled down into a certain headset and entirely reliant on the rider to decide for them when they can no longer retain that position, that's not ideal. The rider is highly unlikely to be able to tell when the horse's muscles are starting to cramp and seize and when they're no longer able to physically flex their neck and their muscles in the way they're being asked to. They also have no ability of really telling their rider other than through their subtle pain behaviors when they're extremely uncomfortable and want the draw reins off. All of this is the rider's choice. The horse gets no say, and this is why gadgets like this are dangerous when we justify them in these ways, because even the best riders in this world, unless they're mind readers, they can't really tell when a horse is starting to fatigue muscularly and to know when to kind of cut back on these types of pieces of equipment. And the ones that think they can are likely still not hitting it at the correct time for the horse. Because in order to do that, you'd have to know exactly when the horse goes, oh my god, I'm starting to get really stressed by this amount of force and this lack of autonomy and how much my neck hurts and my mouth hurts, and they'd have to take it all off right then. And realistically, none of us can do that because we're not frickin' literal horse whisperers and mind readers. Additionally, we'll justify what we use for competition because horses will be hotter in competition, and even if photos like this arise, people will make excuses as to why this is okay and why it doesn't harm the horse. In the end, the horse still experiences it the same way. Which is why even if it's us that gets the bad photo and it's unbecoming and it features a horse that looks like this, we should be able to look at this and go, holy shit, maybe I should go use different equipment next time because that's gross and I don't want to make a repeat of this because my horse is very unhappy here. But instead, people will make light out of photos like this and be like, ha ha ha, look at my horse, they're so funny, like, look at how stupid they look in these photos. All while completely missing out the point that this expression is a pain expression and the bit is being pulled down on the tongue and the tie down's hurting the horse's face and the horse is not happy or having the good time their rider is in this photo. That requires, again, accountability and realizing what we're doing when we project all these types of emotions onto the horse and completely rewrite what's actually going on in these occurrences. That requires us realizing that this whole time, a lot of us and our trainers have been completely lying to us about the premise of what we're being taught. The whole never blame the horse, never blame the horse. It's never the horse's fault. Give the horse the benefit of the doubt. We have that drilled in our head, but we've used it as a reason to let ourselves off the hook for our own behavior and our own mistakes, and that's the problem. And then we stagnate the growth that the horse world gets to experience. And we also make ourselves as equestrians look like we do not care or value the comfort, safety, and happiness of the horses that so many of us do truly love, but we've been misled by our role models and our trainers, and we've carried that with us as we age. And it takes realizing that and wanting to grow and change to have that change happen, because it's a lot more comfortable and easy to continue lying to yourself and continue getting to do what you've always done and not having to care for or value how the horse feels in the same way. It's always easier to do that. Growth is very hard. Admitting that what you used to do was wrong or potentially very harmful to the horse, that's hard to do. But when you start doing it, it's actually very empowering because, first of all, it takes away people's ability to try to weaponize criticism to harm you and hurt your feelings or try to bully you or make you feel like you're lesser than. As soon as you start owning your past mistakes and being like, yeah, I used to do this to my horses and it was not good, but now I've changed and I've learned from that and these are the things that I'm doing to continue bettering myself as a rider. Suddenly the people who want to bully you and make fun of you have no power at all. They can't do it. You're admitting to your own mistakes. They can't bring them up to harm you. And with this realization and this commitment to personal growth, you're able to become a better rider who's less affected by the criticism of others. And you're also going to be less frustrated by default because now instead of just trying to suppress the unwanted behaviors you see in your horse or ignoring the factors that cause these behaviors, you're starting to look at the whole picture and address the whole thing. And what this means is you can actually get to the bottom of a lot of what is causing you grief in training. And it'll make it easier and less frustrating because you're no longer fighting with your horse and being adversarial with them and viewing their behaviors as a problem. And instead it starts to get treated like an investigation. And instead you're looking at your horse and going, you are an incredible, resilient, stoic animal, and it is my duty as your handler to do the best I can to promote your well-being. Personal growth as a rider starts with all of this stuff. Management is just as important, if not more, than how you train your horse. Their everyday living situation is something you should think very deeply about and be honest with yourself in areas where it lacks. And if you can fix those areas immediately with little things, or at least make them better, then do that. But admitting that it's lacking isn't admitting that you're like the worst person ever. It's just being realistic and self-aware. Because honestly, most people don't have the perfect cookie cutter, most amazing, ideal situation for their horse. We're not living in a utopia. But realism, it means that you're going to continue growing and being aware. So the next time you find yourself saying never blame the horse, or hear someone else saying that, think deeply about if there's any areas where you're making it the horse's responsibility for how you choose to handle their behavior. Because a lot of cases, the equipment we justify, the living situations we choose to use, they're all really only projecting how we think something should be dealt with and how we physically feel. And this is why so many people can get away with actually convincing themselves for years that their horses are happier living alone, or that they love their stalls and that they'd prefer not to be out in a large grass field practicing regular natural behaviors like a flight animal needs. We have people who are willing to look science in the face and say, I know better, as someone with no formal education on any of this and who has not read or let alone participated in the studies that have concluded this information. People are willing to deny science to make themselves more comfortable, and yet they still pull the never blame the horse stuff. It's our job to think critically and always be committed to that growth. And to not view it as like a personal attack when people point out factual information. Because it's not a personal attack. It only feels like one if you're dealing with inner discourse with wanting to deny factual information and not wanting to change your ways. And it can feel like an attack because you'll feel guilty and uncomfortable and you won't want to admit that something's a problem, but the information might be compelling enough that you feel like you're caught in a crossroads. And I felt this way a lot over the years. One thing I want to reiterate is that when I was showing on the Arabian horse circuit, my Arab spent most of his time in a stall. He never had group turnout for the vast majority of the time that I owned him, and I owned him for like 9 years. And when he did get turned out, he would go in these small individual dry lot paddocks that are barely big enough to trot in. And as a result, basically all the time I rode him, he was always really hot and difficult to ride, and he had a bolting problem. Guess what fixed that bolting problem more immediately than any other thing we've ever tried in training, including disciplining him for bolting? Giving him 24/7 turnout in a herd. He went from being a bolter and a horse who was hot and difficult to ride to a horse that I could teach beginner lessons on. Completely different horse, and all of the problems I had struggled with for years were suddenly no more. The new problem that was created was him being hard to catch, but honestly, who blames him? When you're in jail for your whole life and suddenly you taste freedom, do you really want the person who took that freedom away from you to catch you when it could be them, once again, taking that freedom away? No, I don't blame him. But I used to do that to him, and I used to justify it, and I used to think that I was righteous, and I used to be in denial, and I used to not want to come to terms with how some of the things I did were problematic, because it was easier for me and more comfortable for me, not for the horse. With my Arabian, I also use training methods that I do not support now. I used draw reins quite often, and I also rode in extremely thin twisted wire bits, or kimberwicks, and I didn't have good hands. I was using them as a shortcut to get him softer, and the only reason he was softer was because the bit hurt more, so he'd back off of it quicker. I, of course, would claim that it was the bit that he needed, but it wasn't his problem at all. It was my problem that I was making his problem and blaming on him because he was heavy, and I wanted to fix that immediately. And in my defense, it also wasn't my fault in the sense that it's not like I was going out of my way to be unkind to my horse. I did love him and I wanted what was best for him. But my trainers at the time had misled me and taught me so much incorrect information, and they had holes in their own training, and they had ethicality issues in their own training and management that they then projected on and taught to me, and I picked up and took with me for years to come. So it wasn't my fault, and it wasn't that I didn't love the horse, but I did do wrong by him. And I bring this up because I get a lot of people on my videos where I talk about stuff like this that feel attacked, and they'll go, oh, you think you're so much better than everyone, and you don't respect people who use different training methods. And what I want to clarify is that this is not about a lack of respect for people who use different methods than me personally. It's about a lack of respect for methods that do not factor in the horse's well-being, especially the ones that are so detrimental and so provenly terrible to their health. I'm not saying everyone needs to have the exact same journey as me or train the same way as me or have the same beliefs as me, but I'm saying that there is a lot of compelling science that shows that a lot of modern practices with horses are extremely problematic and in need of reform. And we need to be talking about this because if we love horses as much as all of us will claim we do, we should want what is best for them. And it's not currently best for them for us to keep covering up problems that have been shown in studies repeatedly. It's about time we put all those problems out into the open and make it a conversation and get comfortable with admitting where we went wrong and some common misconceptions that horse people have about horses that need to be changed. And that will never happen unless we get comfortable admitting when we are wrong and talking about it. And this is all I'm trying to do in this video. So I hope this cleared a lot of stuff up for people. I hope this helps reiterate why horses are so stoic and resilient and why their lives are so stressful and hard, and how amazing it is that they're able to adapt and put up with it and still perform and do all these incredible things that we ask them to do. They are truly incredible animals for that reason, and we owe them so much. And we can start to pay them back by advocating for them because they're voiceless. So every time we lie and perpetuate misinformation or lie to ourselves so that we can continue doing what we're comfortable with and not having to come to terms with what we're doing wrong, we wrong our horse. It's our job to be better. So yeah, that's about all I have to say on this topic. I think that we all just need to take a really long time to think about how much horses have to put up with in their lifetime, especially if we compare them to other animals that are more traditionally kept pets like cats or dogs. And this isn't to take away from the fact that a lot of those animals do go through lots of homes in their lifetime, but it's unlike what is the normal for horses. It is abnormal for a horse to spend their entire life in the same home, whereas this is more common for people that do get dogs and cats responsibly and keep them. Similarly, horses are deprived of basic needs in a way that is much more prevalent than with other animals. For example, it is less common for someone to get support for going, hey, I'm not going to feed my carnivorous cat meat. They're going on a vegan diet that will kill them. They're less likely to get support for this, and the people that do support them are more likely to be viewed as ignorant. Whereas if someone goes, my horse prefers not to be turned out, they don't like turnout, and they love their grain and they need grain, and no, they don't have ulcers, there's a good chance that all of that is untrue, but people are likely to get a fair amount of support for it in the horse world. When they say that their horse doesn't like turnout, it's because of stress behaviors that exist due to the horse being deprived and reacting disordered because of that. But the person will blame it on the horse in order to take blame off themselves. And I used to do this all the time. I'm admitting right away that I was guilty of it. I'm sure there's people who have followed me for a long time that have even seen it happen because I've done it online. And there's a lot of stuff that I didn't initially agree with that I do see the merit of now because I've grown and I've adapted as a person. And lots of people will do this, especially young riders. I find young riders who really trust and believe in their trainers have the hardest time coming to terms with the fact that their trainers could have taught them misinformation. And this can be really, really hard to deal with, so it can take them some time. I struggled with as much growth between the ages of like 16 to 22 because I was a lot more stubborn, ignorant, and defensive. And as I started to get into my mid-20s, I became a lot more open-minded, and I started to put together concepts that I initially struggled with and initially didn't believe in. And suddenly a light bulb clicked on and I was like, oh, that's what they meant. And since then, I've been doing a lot of learning, and I've been wanting to try to explain my thoughts in a way that might be more conversational and helping people understand it so that they don't feel attacked and so that it gives them something to think about and potentially come out knowing more after. And that's all I'm trying to do here. This isn't to shame people, it's just to discuss information and trends that I see in behavior of horse people. So anyways, thank you for listening. I hope that this was good. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out my merch store. This is from my merch store. There's lots of cool stuff in store. And my big bridal release is happening on December 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 4 p.m. Pacific. So check that out, guys. Link down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks, guys.